The metal box in my hands holds a death certificate. My name, my birthday, but 23 years ago. My parents are packing to flee, and I just found the proof. I was stolen. My childhood friend Michael stands in the doorway, blocking my escape, his voice cold as he admits his father helped cover it up. The flash drive in my pocket is my only chance to prove who I really am, before they silence me forever. The garage door slams shut behind me. My father's fists are clenched, his face twisted with something darker than anger. I have seconds to decide. Trust the friend who just betrayed me, or run into the night with nothing but a name that isn't mine. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light, piercing the attic's singular, grime-streaked porthole. Sarah's knees groaned against the rough heart pine floorboards as she pried at the loose plank. The wood resisted with a dry, splintering shriek, finally yielding to reveal a cavity choked with cobwebs and insulation. Tucked within the shadows sat a dull charcoal gray metal box, its surface cold and smelling of iron and ancient copper. Her pulse thrummed against her throat. She wiped a smudge of soot from the lid, her fingers trembling against the rusted latch. It snapped open with a sharp metallic pop that echoed through the hollow silence of the eaves. Inside, atop a stack of yellowed photographs, lay a crisp, heavy sheet of vellum. Sarah pinched the edge of the paper. The texture reminded her of dried skin. Her eyes traced the embossed seal of the county registrar, stark and official against the cream background. Beneath the header, the name screamed in bold, black ink: Sarah Elizabeth Johnson. The date of death preceded her 5th birthday by 3 days. She traced the embossed letters of her own name, her thumb snagging on the embossed seal. A draft whistled through the roof tiles, carrying the scent of damp earth and approaching rain. Downstairs, the front door creaked. Front door. Heavy boots thudded against the hardwood, rhythmic and steady. Sarah? Her father's voice drifted up the stairs, thick with its usual gravelly warmth. You still up there messing with those old trunks? She didn't answer. She stared at the cause of death listed at the bottom: respiratory failure. The paper crinkled as her grip tightened, the sound like a small, dying animal in the stillness of the crawlspace. She pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen's clinical white light blinding in the dim attic. With fingers that felt like numb blocks of ice, she began to take photos. Flash, the seal. Flash, the signature of the attending physician. Flash, the date that claimed she had been dead for over 20 years. She was a ghost documenting her own haunting. She swiped through her gallery, comparing the biometric data from her passport, the curve of her chin, the distance between her eyes, to the grainy hospital photos tucked in the box. The girl in the photos was her. But the girl in the photos was buried in a plot in Oak Grove Cemetery. The floorboards groaned again. Richard was closer now, at the base of the attic ladder. Sarah scrambled to shove the vellum back into the box, her mind racing through the last 48 hours of quiet, desperate research. She had searched the state's digital archives under the guise of an architectural project, finding only a void where her early childhood should have been. Now, the void had a name and a death date. She slid the loose plank back into place, just as the ladder rattled. "Sarah, honey, the movers are here," Richard said, his head appearing through the hatch. He smelled of expensive sandalwood and the peppermint he chewed to mask his stress. He scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the dust she had disturbed. "We need to get the heavy furniture down. Why are you sweating? It's like an oven up here." "I'm fine," Sarah said, her voice a brittle thread. She adjusted her sleeves, pulling them down to cover her wrists. "Just sorting through some old memories before we leave the house for good. Richard smiled, but it was the smile of a man watching a clock. Memories are just weight, Sarah. Let's get you downstairs. Michael's here to help with the kitchen crates. The descent from the attic felt like sinking into deep water. The air in the main house was cleaner, smelling of lemon polish and the cardboard boxes that now lined the hallways like a paper labyrinth. In the kitchen, Michael Davis was already at work, his boyish face tight with concentration as he taped up a box of fine china. He looked up and smiled, a gesture that usually made Sarah feel safe. But today, it felt like a mask. "Hey, stranger," Michael said, his voice hitching upward at the end, as if asking permission to speak. "Ready to leave this place behind?" Sarah waited until Richard had retreated to the study to argue with a moving foreman. She grabbed Michael's arm, her fingers instinctively brushing his wrist to feel the thrum of his pulse. It was fast, erratic. She pulled him into the walk-in pantry, the shelves bare and smelling of stale flour. "Michael, look at this," she whispered, pulling up the photos on her phone. She scrolled rapidly, the images flickering like a strobe light. The death certificate, the adoption papers, the dates don't match. "I died in 1999, Michael. According to the state of Illinois, I don't exist." Michael's jaw clenched rhythmically. He didn't gasp. He didn't look surprised. He stared at the screen, his eyes flat. "Sarah, you know how paperwork was back then. Mistakes happen. My dad says the county records are a mess. This isn't a typo, Michael. It's a different girl with my name, or it's me and I'm a stolen person." She felt the panic rising, a cold tide in her chest. "I need to take this to a lawyer, not your father. Someone independent." "I think we should just breathe first," Michael said, his habitual question mark tone grating on her nerves. "Maybe let me talk to my dad. He can look into it quietly. If you go running to a stranger, you might ruin your father's reputation over a clerical error." "My father's reputation?" Sarah stepped back, the wires shelving biting into her shoulder. "What about my life?" She didn't wait for his answer. She pushed past him, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed the physical box, the original ink, the weight of the proof. She bypassed the kitchen and headed for the garage, where her SUV sat parked near the lawnmower and the stacks of winter tires. The air here was heavy with the scent of gasoline and damp concrete. She reached for the passenger door, but a hand clamped onto the frame, slamming it shut with a metallic boom that echoed through the rafters. Richard stood there, his silver hair perfectly in place, but his eyes were like chips of flint. "Where are you going, Sarah?" he asked. His voice was calm, but he was tapping the glass of his Rolex 1, 2, 3 times. "I'm going for a drive, Dad. I need air." "You have the box, don't you?" Richard's hand moved from the car to her shoulder. His grip was a vice. "I saw you on the security feed, creeping around the attic like a thief in your own home." "I'm not a thief. I'm the one who was stolen." Sarah shrieked, the sound raw and jagged. "I found the certificate, Dad. I found the papers. Who was the girl who died? Who am I?" Richard's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The fatherly warmth evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard lines of a man who viewed people as assets to be managed. He pinned her against the side of the SUV, his weight crushing the breath from her lungs. "Listen to me. We chose you. We paid a premium to give you a life of luxury, of safety. We shored up the foundation of this family so you would never have to know the filth of the world. And you want to throw it away for a piece of paper? You kidnapped me. We saved you. Richard roared. He reached for her purse, his fingers clawing at the leather strap. "Give me the phone. Give me the documents. We are moving to the city, and we are leaving this rot behind." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a white-hot spark of survival. As Richard lunged for her bag, she brought her knee up with everything she had, catching him in the thigh. He grunted, his grip slackening for a fraction of a second. She shoved him back, his expensive loafers slipping on an oil patch. He tumbled against a stack of crates, the wood splintering under his weight. She didn't look back. She scrambled for the side door of the garage, her boots skidding on the concrete. She felt the flash drive in her pocket, the digital backup she'd made, and it felt like a hot coal against her leg. She burst out into the driveway, the humid afternoon air hitting her like a physical blow. Her car was only 20 feet away. She just had to reach the driver's side, lock the doors, and drive until the suburbs turned into a blur. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah sprinted toward the end of the driveway, her mind working with the cold, logical precision of a designer. She knew she couldn't outrun Richard forever, and she couldn't go to the local police, not yet. She needed a witness. She saw Michael standing by the gate, his hands in his pockets, looking distressed. This was the smartest move. Michael had been her best friend since 3rd grade. He was a law student. He understood the weight of evidence. Even if he was hesitant in the kitchen, seeing Richard's violence would change everything. Michael was her bridge to safety, the one person who could testify that she wasn't acting out of some psychological break, as Richard would surely claim. She reached him, grabbing his forearm. "Michael, help me. He's out of control. We have to go now." Phase 2. False positive. Michael's expression softened immediately. He stepped toward her, shielding her with his body as Richard emerged from the garage, limping and shouting. "It's okay, Sarah," Michael whispered, his voice steady for the first time all day. "I've got you. Get in my car. We'll go to my dad's office, and we'll sort this out. I won't let him touch you." Relief washed over Sarah, so thick it made her dizzy. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out a sob of pure gratitude. Michael was choosing her. He was standing up to the man who paid his father's retainers. As he guided her toward his sedan, she felt the crushing weight of the last hour begin to lift. She was safe. Phase 3. The crack. As Michael opened the passenger door, Sarah noticed something. He wasn't looking at Richard with anger or defiance. He was looking at Richard with a strange, expectant intensity. And his hand, the one guiding her, wasn't on her shoulder. He was holding her wrist, his thumb pressed firmly against her radial artery. He wasn't comforting her. He was checking her pulse. Just like she did to others. His grip was clinical, methodical. He looked down at his phone, which was vibrating in his other hand. He didn't answer it, but his thumb swiped a command on the screen. The sound of the car's central locking system echoed like a gunshot in the quiet street. Click-clack. Phase 4. Full collapse. "The heart rate is 140, Mr. Johnson," Michael said. The question mark tone was gone. His voice was flat, professional, and terrifyingly cold. He didn't look at Sarah as he shoved her into the seat and slammed the door. Sarah lunged for the handle, but it was dead. The electronic locks had been engaged from the driver's console. "Michael, what are you doing?" she screamed, pounding on the glass. Michael walked around to the driver's side, nodding to Richard, who was now standing at the edge of the driveway, wiping dust from his suit. "She has a digital backup on a drive in her right pocket," Michael called out. "And she already sent the photos to a cloud folder. I've been monitoring the upload from my laptop in the kitchen." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach, leaving her gasping for air. Michael hadn't been her friend. He had been a chaperone, a monitor. His father hadn't just been the family lawyer. He had been the architect of the silence, and Michael was the apprentice. He had known about the original Sarah since he was 15. He had watched her grow up, watched her struggle with her identity, all while reporting her stability back to Richard like a lab technician. "You've been tracking me," Sarah whispered as Michael climbed into the driver's seat. "We had to, Sarah," Michael said, finally looking at her. There was no pity in his eyes, only the weary resignation of a man performing a chore. "You're a high-maintenance asset. You always have been. My father told me loyalty is the only law. You should have just stayed in the attic." He put the car in gear. He didn't look back as Richard watched them pull away, tapping his Rolex 3 times in a gesture of grim satisfaction. Sarah was no longer a daughter. She was a breach of contract being transported to a secure location. The SUV's engine roared, a mechanical growl that vibrated through Sarah's bones as she jammed the gear shift into reverse. She didn't have time for Michael's explanations or Richard's security. She slammed her foot on the gas and the vehicle lurched backward, the tires shrieking against the asphalt. The garage fence, a white-painted barrier of false Victorian charm, disintegrated into a shower of splinters and twisted wire as she plowed through it. She didn't stop. She swung the wheel, the back end of the SUV fishtailing onto the manicured lawn, leaving deep, muddy gashes in the perfect turf. She drove until the suburban sprawl bled into the anonymous gray of the highway, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 3 seconds. Every pair of headlights was a threat. Every dark sedan was Michael or a hired shadow. She found a roadside motel tucked behind a flickering neon sign that promised cable TV and vacancy. The air here smelled of industrial bleach and old cigarettes, a sterile scent that burned her nostrils but offered a strange kind of comfort. It was a place where people went to be forgotten. She walked into the cramped office, her hands trembling as she reached for her wallet. The clerk, a man with skin like wrinkled parchment, didn't look up from his small television. "One night," Sarah said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. She swiped her credit card. The machine emitted a long, mournful beep. The clerk tried it again. Another beep. "Cards declined, lady," he said, finally looking up. "Try another one." Sarah tried her backup card, then her business account. Each one was met with the same flat, electronic rejection. A cold sweat broke out across her neck. She pulled up her banking app on her phone, only to see a red banner across the top. "Account frozen. Contact your primary holder." Richard had pulled the plug. He had turned off her life with a few clicks. "I have cash," she stammered, fumbling with her purse. She produced a crumpled $100 bill, the emergency money she'd hidden in her glove box months ago. The clerk took the money, his eyes suspicious. "Sign here. No visitors." As she walked toward room 114, a notification popped up on her phone. A news alert. "Local vehicle theft. Silver SUV. Illinois plate 442-JSN. Driver considered endangered and potentially unstable." Richard hadn't just frozen her money. He had weaponized the law. He had reported her car stolen, turning every police officer in the state into his personal recovery team. She was a fugitive in a stolen life, driving a stolen car with no way to pay for her next meal. She pushed open the door to the motel room. The air was heavy with the scent of lemon-scented floor wax. She didn't turn on the light. She stood in the shadows, her back against the door, listening to the rhythmic drip of the bathroom faucet. Drip, drip, drip. She moved toward the bed, intending to collapse, but she stopped. There, sitting perfectly upright in the center of the floral polyester bedspread, was a small, tattered brown teddy bear. One of its button eyes was missing, and the fur was matted from years of being held. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. It was Barnaby, her childhood bear, the one she had left in a box in the attic, the one she hadn't packed. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. She hadn't used a GPS. She had taken 3 different turns, doubled back twice, and picked a motel at random. Yet, here he was. Barnaby was waiting for her, a silent messenger from the fortress she thought she'd escaped. She didn't touch the bear. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The smell of the lemon bleach suddenly felt suffocating, masking a deeper, more predatory scent. The sandalwood of Richard's cologne. He wasn't in the room, but he was everywhere. He was the air, the walls, the very ground beneath her. He wanted her to know that there was no such thing as a way. There was only the length of the leash he allowed her. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the motel's settling floorboards sounded like a footstep. By dawn, Sarah was back in the SUV, the engine idling low as she sat in the parking lot of the county library. The building was a brutalist block of concrete and glass, a fortress of information that felt like her only hope. She spent hours in the basement, the air cool and smelling of damp paper and ozone. The microfiche machine whirred, a hypnotic mechanical hum that drowned out the world. She fed the reels for July 1999 into the scanner, her eyes aching from the flickering gray light of the screen. "Come on," she whispered, her fingers ghosting over the controls. She found the date. July 14th. The day the original Sarah Johnson was supposed to have died. She scrolled through the local news section, looking for an obituary, a police report, anything. The screen went white. Sarah frowned, adjusting the focus. It wasn't a blur. The film had been physically altered. She pulled the reel out and held it up to the light. A neat, surgical square had been cut out of the plastic. The entire week of July 1999 was gone. She lunged for the computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She bypassed the library's main portal, trying to access the county's digital archives. Error. File corrupted. Error. Data not found. Every digital path she took ended in a wall of red text. It wasn't a glitch. It was a scrub. Someone had gone through the records with a digital flamethrower, turning her history into ash. Richard's reach wasn't just in her bank account. It was in the very architecture of the city's memory. "Can I help you find something, Miss Johnson?" The voice was low, gravelly, and entirely too close. Sarah spun around, her chair screeching against the linoleum. A man stood at the end of the aisle. He was nondescript, wearing a gray windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low. He was cracking his knuckles, a loud, rhythmic pop, pop, pop that echoed in the silence of the stacks. "I'm just doing research," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She began to pack her bag, her movements frantic. "Research is a dangerous hobby," the man said. He took a step forward. He didn't look like a librarian. He looked like a man who was paid to find things that didn't want to be found. "Your father is very worried. He says you've stopped taking your medication, that you're having episodes." "I don't have medication. I'm not having episodes." Sarah lunged for the exit, but the man was faster. He blocked the end of the aisle, his arms crossed. "Let's not make a scene in a library, Sarah. It's disrespectful." Sarah didn't argue. She grabbed a heavy metal book cart, piled high with thick legal tomes, and shoved it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The cart's wheels shrieked as it hurtled down the narrow aisle, slamming into the man's shins. He grunted, stumbling back into a shelf of encyclopedias. Sarah bolted. She sprinted through the labyrinth of books, the scent of old paper giving way to the sharp, cold smell of the rain outside. She didn't look back until she was miles away, her lungs burning, her SUV hidden in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. She had one lid left. A name scribbled on the back of one of the photos in the metal box. Margaret Higgins, Social Services. The address took her to the edge of the county, where the paved roads turned to gravel and the trees grew thick and tangled. Margaret's cottage was a small, weather-beaten structure that looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the forest. The air here smelled of wood smoke and rotting leaves. Sarah knocked, the sound hollow against the heavy oak door. "Go away," a reedy voice called from inside. "I don't buy whatever you're selling." "I'm not selling anything," Sarah shouted. She held her phone against the window, the screen displaying the photo of the 1999 death certificate. "I'm the girl from this paper. I'm Sarah Johnson." There was a long silence. Then, the sound of 3 heavy deadbolts sliding back. The door opened a crack, revealing an elderly woman with eyes that looked like they had seen too much and forgotten none of it. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret said, her voice a dry rasp. "That name is a death sentence." "It's already my name," Sarah said, pushing her way inside. The cottage was filled with files. They were stacked on the chairs, the table, even the stove. Margaret had been running a shadow investigation for 20 years. "I found the box," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The certificate, the adoption papers. Tell me the truth. Who am I?" Margaret sat down, her hands shaking as she lit a cigarette. The smoke curled in the air, smelling of acrid tobacco. "You weren't an orphan, Sarah. Not the way the papers say. You were a replacement. Richard and Eleanor lost their daughter to SIDS. It broke Eleanor. She went dark. Richard couldn't have a broken wife. It didn't fit the brand. So they adopted me?" "No," Margaret said, looking Sarah directly in the eyes. "They stole you. Eleanor had a sister, a woman the family had disowned for marrying the wrong kind of man. That sister had a baby, a girl the same age as the one they lost. Richard didn't go to an agency. He went to his sister-in-law's house while she was at work. He took you, and then he used his money to make the sister-in-law disappear into the state mental health system." Sarah felt the world tilt. Her mother wasn't just her kidnapper, she was her aunt. Her entire life was a play staged by a man who viewed family as a commodity to be traded and stolen. "You're not a Johnson," Margaret whispered. "You're a ghost living in a dead girl's clothes." The weight of the revelation was a physical pressure, a crushing force that made Sarah's breath come in ragged, shallow gasps. She wasn't just a victim of a crime. She was the product of a systematic erasure. Her biological mother had been discarded like a piece of faulty equipment, and Sarah had been installed to keep the Johnson family machine running. "I need proof," Sarah said, her voice hard. "I need something that a court can't ignore." "I have the ledger," Margaret said, moving toward the kitchen. "The records of the payments. Richard didn't just steal a baby. He bought a city." But before she could reach the safe, Sarah's phone buzzed. A video message. She pressed play. The screen showed a sterile white room. Eleanor was sitting in a chair, her eyes glazed, her skin the color of ash. A nurse was standing behind her, holding a tray of surgical instruments. Richard's voice came through the speaker, calm and terrifyingly reasonable. "Sarah, your mother is having a very difficult time. The doctors say her nerves are so frayed that she might need a more permanent solution. A lobotomy is such an old-fashioned word, but it's very effective for cooling the blood. No, Sarah whispered. Bring the ledger and the flash drive to Margaret's house, Richard continued. I know you're there. If you're not out front in 10 minutes, I'll tell the surgeon to proceed. Don't be a difficult asset, Sarah. Think of the family. The video cut to black. Sarah looked at Margaret. The elderly woman's face was pale, her reedy voice failing her. He's here, Margaret breathed. The sound of a window shattering in the kitchen exploded through the house. Richard didn't wait 10 minutes. He was done negotiating. He stepped through the broken frame, a crowbar in his hand, his silver hair gleaming in the dim light of the cottage. The ledger, Margaret, Richard said. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the files. Give it to me, and we can all go back to the way things were. The way things were was a lie, Sarah screamed. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the counter, the heavy metal cold and grounding in her hand. Richard laughed, a dry barking sound. A lie that paid for your Ivy League education. A lie that kept you in silk and sunshine. You want the truth? The truth is cold, Sarah. The truth is a mother who didn't want you and a father who's rotting in a grave in the Bronx. We gave you everything. He lunged. He was surprisingly fast for a man his age. The crowbar swung in a wide arc, smashing into the kitchen table and sending splinters flying. Sarah swung the skillet, the heavy iron connecting with Richard's shoulder with a sickening thud. He roared, stumbling back, but he didn't drop the bar. He backhanded her, the force of the blow sending Sarah sprawling across the floor. Her vision blurred, the scent of copper, blood, filling her mouth. You're depreciating, Sarah, Richard hissed, standing over her. You're becoming a liability. He reached down and grabbed her by the hair, dragging her toward the basement door. Margaret tried to intervene, her frail hands clawing at his suit, but he shoved her aside like a nuisance. He kicked the basement door open, the hinges screaming. As he dragged her down the stairs, Sarah's eyes caught a glimpse of the original death certificate, which had fallen from her pocket during the struggle. There, at the bottom, in the space for the official witness, Chief of Police, David Miller. The realization was the final nail. It wasn't just Richard. It wasn't just Michael. The entire structure of the law in this town was built on her stolen life. The man who was supposed to protect her was the one who had signed her death warrant 20 years ago. Richard shoved her into the dark, cold cellar. The floor was damp stone, the air smelling of earth and rot. Stay here and think about your value, Richard said. He slammed the door. Sarah heard the heavy padlock click into place. Then, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a hammer. He was nailing the door shut. She scrambled for her phone, but the screen was dead. A signal jammer. Michael had taught him well. She was in a hole in the earth, and the only people who knew she existed were the ones who wanted her dead. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah sat in the darkness, her mind racing. She heard voices upstairs, Richard talking to someone. She pressed her ear to the floorboards, straining to hear. It was Chief Miller. She heard him tell Richard that the cleanup was almost complete and that the state police wouldn't be arriving. This was her chance. She knew that Miller was corrupt, but he was also a politician. If she could appeal to his sense of self-preservation, she could flip him. She began to shout, not for help, but for a negotiation. Chief Miller, I know you signed the papers. I have the digital backup stored with a third party. If I don't check in every hour, they go to the FBI. You don't have to go down with Richard. It was a smart, calculated bluff, designed to create a rift between the two conspirators. Phase 2. False positive. The hammering stopped. The heavy footsteps of Chief Miller approached the door. "Sarah?" His voice was muffled but sounded genuinely concerned. "Richard, move aside. Let me talk to her." Sarah heard a brief argument, then the sound of the padlock being turned. The door creaked open a few inches, and the chief's face appeared in the gap. He looked tired, his eyes avoiding hers. "You're right, Sarah. This has gone too far. Richard's lost his mind. I can't protect him anymore. Give me the flash drive, and I'll take you to the station myself. I'll turn state's evidence. We can end this." He reached a hand through the gap, his palm open. Sarah felt a surge of triumph. She had outplayed them. She reached into her shoe, pulling out the backup drive she'd hidden there. Phase 3. The crack. She placed the drive in his hand. Miller's fingers closed around it, but he didn't pull back immediately. He looked past her into the dark corners of the basement. He wasn't looking for an exit. He was looking for something else. Sarah noticed a small black device clipped to his belt, a digital recorder, but the light wasn't green. It was red, and he wasn't wearing his badge. His uniform was clean, but the place where the silver star should have been was empty. He wasn't here as a cop. He was here as a partner. Phase 4. Full collapse. Miller's face hardened. He didn't pull her out. He shoved the drive into his pocket and kicked the door shut with a violence that shook the stone walls. "The FBI doesn't have a file, Sarah," Miller shouted through the wood. "I checked the federal database 10 minutes ago. You were bluffing." "You said you'd help," Sarah screamed, throwing herself against the door. "I am helping," Miller replied, his voice now cold and official. "I'm helping the man who paid for my daughter's chemo. You're not a person, Sarah. You're a cold case that I closed 20 years ago, and dead girls don't talk." She heard the hammer start again. Thud, thud, thud. But this time, it wasn't just the door. She heard the sound of heavy furniture being dragged in front of it. Then, the smell of smoke drifted through the cracks. Richard wasn't just locking her in. He was burning the evidence and the cottage to the ground. She had handed over her only leverage to the one man who could truly erase her. She was no longer a kidnapping victim. She was a loose end being cauterized. The smoke thickened. A gray acrid veil that stung Sarah's eyes and made her throat feel like it was lined with sandpaper. She could hear the crackle of flames upstairs, the hungry roar of fire consuming the old wood of Margaret's cottage. Richard was outside, she knew, watching the history of his crimes turn to ash. She didn't panic. Panic was a design flaw. She forced her mind into a state of cold, analytical observation. She scanned the basement, her eyes watering. The stone walls were solid, but the ceiling was a grid of old, rotting beams. She saw it, the coal chute. It was a narrow, iron-rimmed tunnel set high in the foundation, a relic from the days when the house was heated by black stone. The grating was rusted, the iron orange and flaking. Sarah grabbed a heavy iron pipe from the floor, a piece of discarded plumbing. She climbed onto a stack of old crates, her breath coming in short, ragged puffs. She wedged the pipe into the gap between the stone and the iron grate. "Leverage," she whispered. She threw her entire weight onto the pipe. The metal groaned, a high-pitched, protesting shriek that was drowned out by the roar of the fire above. Her muscles screamed, her fingers slick with soot and sweat. Crack. The stone crumbled, and the grate shifted. Sarah shoved again, her shoulder popping with the effort. The iron slats gave way, falling outward into the damp earth. She scrambled into the tunnel. It was tight, a concrete throat filled with decades of coal dust. The soot entered her nose and mouth, a bitter, choking powder. She clawed her way forward, her fingernails tearing against the rough stone. She burst out into the night air, tumbling onto the wet grass behind the cottage. The heat from the fire was a physical wall, the orange glow illuminating the woods like a hellish sunrise. She saw Richard. He was standing by a small bonfire in the yard, tossing handfuls of paper, the ledger, her photos, the death certificate, into the flames. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who had finally balanced his books. Sarah didn't stay to watch. She stayed low, crawling through the underbrush until she reached the road. She didn't go to her car. She didn't go to the police. She began to run. 2 hours later, she stood in the shadows of the local news station, WCN 7. The building was a beacon of blue light in the dark downtown. She knew the layout. She had designed their digital branding package 6 months ago. She knew the backdoor codes for the staff entrance, a detail she'd logged in her spreadsheet under client logistics. She slipped inside, the air-conditioned silence a shock to her system. She made her way to the editing suite, her hands black with soot, her clothes torn. She sat at the terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She didn't just have the photos. She had the architectural scans of her own bone structure she'd taken for a medical project. She used her design software to create a digital overlay, a frame-by-frame comparison of the dead Sarah's skull against her own. It was a perfect match. "Going live in 3, 2, 1, she whispered. She didn't wait for a producer. She bypassed the local feed and patched her signal directly into the digital broadcast tower. Across the city, televisions flickered. The nightly news was replaced by a high-definition image of a death certificate, followed by the face of a girl who looked exactly like the one on the screen. "My name is Sarah Johnson." Her voice echoed through 1,000 living rooms. "And I have been dead for 23 years. This is how they did it." She laid out the evidence, the payments to Miller, the kidnapping of her aunt's child, the systematic erasure of her identity. She showed the world the man Richard Johnson really was. By the time the station security reached the booth, the story was already on the national wire. The FBI, alerted by the broadcast's breach of federal communication lines, was already moving in. Richard's wealth couldn't buy a national audience. His silence had been broken by the very tools he'd paid for her to master. Weeks later, the dust had settled, though the air still felt heavy. Richard and Miller were in federal custody, their fortress dismantled by a swarm of investigators. Eleanor was in a private facility, one that didn't involve lobotomies, but one where she would never again be able to call Sarah daughter. Sarah stood in her childhood bedroom. The room was a museum of a life that wasn't hers. The white furniture, the symmetrical pillows, the rows of books she'd read because she thought she had to be perfect. She picked up the old teddy bear, Barnaby. He was a link to a past that was stolen, but he was also a symbol of the leash. She walked to the trash can in the hallway and dropped him in. "Goodbye, Sarah," she said. She didn't pack much. A few clothes, her laptop, and the charcoal gray metal box, now empty of its secrets. She drove west. She didn't stop until she saw the gray, rain-swept skyline of Seattle. She found a small studio in a neighborhood where no one knew the name Johnson. She walked into a local DMV, her heart steady. "Name?" the clerk asked, not looking up. "Maya," she said. "Maya Higgins. Now," she stands before a blank canvas in her new studio. The windows are open, the sound of the city a constant, low-frequency hum that no longer feels like a threat. The air smells of salt and oil paint. She picks up a brush. She doesn't check her own pulse. She doesn't log an apology. She begins to paint. It's not a symmetrical design or a corporate logo. It's a self-portrait. The lines are jagged, the colors are raw and imperfect. She counts the stairs to her loft. 1, 2, 3. A whisper to the memory of Margaret, who had died in the fire. But she doesn't do it out of fear. She does it to know exactly where she stands, on her own ground, under her own name. The canvas isn't a lie. It's the first thing she's ever owned that wasn't paid for with someone else's blood. Maya Higgins takes a breath, the air clean and true, and begins to live.